All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the GGGKR. And today we are going to be discussing the third book in the Fionavar tapestry, The Darkest Road, which I am so thrilled to be able to
Oh,
discuss.
Mike, there we go.
Oh, there it is. You have to hold it like way in front of you when you've got
I
the.
can't get these books in Spain, and it's really making me sad because I do not really like Kindles, and I could not find them to buy them. So if anybody
That's
wants to send one to me, I'd love to get it.
Okay, there you go. There's the message. But we are going to be discussing it, and my partner in crime, Evan, and I are doing a read of all of Guy Gavriel Kay's books in publication order, except Tigana, which we did first. So after the Fiona of Our Tapestry, we will next be doing A Song for Our Bone in roughly a month or so with a couple of other people. And yeah, we're just going through all the books, and now we're doing the third book. We've already discussed with our friend PL the first two books, The Summer Tree and The Wandering Fire. And today we are joined by Dr. Erin Keating, who has a wonderful channel that everyone should check out. It's as her name there, it says Dr. Erin. I love the name. And she's joining us to discuss The Darkest Hour. Highly appropriate because Dr. Keating has actually taught. Oh, I said it again, didn't I? Darkest Road.
You don't know people out there that we just had a
We had a
five
whole
minute long
discussion about
conversation about
this.
this.
I keep wanting to
It's
call this the darkest
it's
hour.
perfect. That was perfect.
It was classic Philip Chase. It's the darkest road, everyone. And I had said it right the first time, at least. But Dr. Keating is here to help us out, and I'm sure she will remember the title, as well as many other things that she wants to talk about with this. But you've taught this before, haven't you? You've taught this in a course at your university. We're so excited to have you here to discuss this. You've even had the pleasure of introducing Guy Gavriel Kay at the University of Manitoba for a talk. So yeah, just I'm sure there's so much you have to say about this. So what are your thoughts, Erin, on this trilogy as a whole, the Fionavar Tapestry, and then also on The Darkest Road specifically?
Perfect.
And yes, thank you so much for having me. And I will say I've only taught the Summer Tree, so I only taught the first
Aha.
book
Okay.
of it just recently, actually this past fall. Although that was so much fun to do, as I'm sure you can imagine, within the context of a literature degree, and people have taken medieval courses and just all of those things. But yes, thank you for having me here. I did watch the first two videos. I feel like I'm like crashing into the third one, but I watched the first two and thought they were great. And I would say, in terms of the entire trilogy, unsurprisingly, I love this. I actually have lost count of how many times I've read it. I had it read to me when it first was published, and I'm not going to say how old I was at that point. um, but I have a long history in terms of the trilogy, and that's not to say it's without its flaws, but just it has a very special place in my heart. And in particular, to move into the third book, The Darkest Road. Um, One of the things I love about this third book is that it just is such a skillful deepening of everything that's come before, right? So when I was watching your first two videos and you're talking about these themes, right, of like free will versus choice, and you're talking about these characterizations, and you're talking about what he's doing with sort of the medieval and the Arthurian, and just all of it becomes that much more rich and that much deeper in this third book as he sort of fully allows those things to breathe, right, with the length that you have in a trilogy. And the other thing I'd say that I love about this is I probably cried at least 4 to 5 different parts of this book. So, like, by the time you get to the end, I feel like that emotional weight that maybe I know Evan thought was maybe missing from that first book a little bit, and I can understand that, is just, it's so here, and he does it so well in my mind in this final book.
4 or 5 times checks out for me too. Oh dear. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to get into the details of it. But Pio, first, would you please tell us your non-spoiler thoughts on the trilogy as a whole, which you've shared to some degree already, but now we're here on the darkest road. So what do you think?
Well, quickly, first of all, so great to have Erin here. I feel like if I had profs like Philip and Erin in university, I probably would have gotten better grades, in a lot of my courses. But it's great to have you here, Erin. So if you can see it, I know with the Zoom it's flashing in and out, but I have the compendium here of all three volumes. I haven't put on a ranking recently of a re-ranking of my top traditionally published fantasy series of all time. This will now figure in it. I absolutely loved this series overall. I think it is masterclass writing. I believe that I was trying because I was the one out of Evan and Philip who had read the whole thing a while back. I was trying not to spoil anything. I was trying not to influence you to in any way, unduly influence
Yes,
you
you
by.
were. Yes, you were.
Yes, I was. I admit it. I was. Oh, well, okay. So now that you've read it, I hope, and as Erin alluded to, that the depth of emotion that Kay evoked and brought out in the reader for the reader with especially, and we talked a bit about backstages, the choices that the characters made, the sacrifices, the beauty, the pathos, the I mean, again, I too wept at a few scenes. The most with one character's arc, which we'll talk about, but also again, when an author writes this skillfully, it's about the work that was put in prior to this book in the first two books, because you would have had to care about these characters to actually feel the loss when we lose them. But it was also the beauty of the passages, the beauty of the writing when these losses happen. It wasn't just the buildup; it was the actual passages itself, and I feel like it just cemented for me why Guy Gavriel is such a stupendous writer and why this series is just fantastic. So,
Well said. Thank you, PL. So, Evan, what are your thoughts on the trilogy as a whole, Fionavar Tapestry, and how did you find The Darkest Road?
So yes. So first, let me say that I have great respect for Kay and what he's done here. His ambition, as we've talked about before, is huge and admirable. He's created a work and a world rich with mythic and epic and romantic resonances, and he's like the weaver in his story. He's entwined them in creative ways in an attempt to paraphrase his words. To show that the elements of high fantasy still have and will continue to have vitality for the modern reader. Um, the series is structurally and intellectually very thought-provoking. The plot arcs, the character arcs, the thematic work, the way he inverts and subverts and reworks the sources he's working with, all of that can be very fruitfully analyzed, I think. And I think we're probably going to do a fair amount of that in this chat. That said, and Philip is rather cruelly forcing me to be honest, which I don't want to be, especially after I heard these amazing things that Dr. Keating and PL are saying, because obviously this book means a lot to them. But I do have to say that there is something here that's just not working for me. And now, what doesn't work and what doesn't work for me are obviously overlapping categories, and I'm not presumptuous enough to think that I can see through my biases to spot the difference. So take what I'm going to say with a spoonful of salt. Um, I think the biggest issue I have is one that we flagged at the very beginning, and which has also, consequences in the final book. It's the characterization of the Toronto Five. If a major theme in this story is what happens when modern characters enter a high fantasy world and find themselves assuming archetypal roles, a compelling interplay between those two things, I think, depends on having vibrant, complex, modern characters to begin with, and I don't think Kay really gives us that. He does too little, I think, to ground these five in the reality, the specificity of their lives and minds before they're swept away into a fantasy world and very quickly thrust into the epic, fast-moving drama. So the collision between the modern and the mythic doesn't produce the kind of sparks that I'd hoped for, and generally, I found that the Toronto Five never really came alive for me, and so it was harder to invest in their conclusions at the end of The Darkest Road. Now, to be clear, this issue is, I think, not a result of Kay being a bad writer. I think it arises out of a very difficult problem that he set for himself that would challenge any writer, even the best writer, because the sources he's evoking don't draw their power from the kind of characterization we expect from contemporary fiction. Their power comes from elemental forces and narrative patterns and archetypal characters who know what they mean to say and say it straightforwardly in a high register of language. To tell that kind of story in the modern day is extremely hard for anyone not named Tolkien, and I'm sure it wasn't a cakewalk for him. And even Tolkien didn't have the added challenge of incorporating five people from 1980s Toronto and then incorporating existing characters from the Arthurian canon. And so to meet this massive challenge, to create this epic feeling, his Kay, through his third person narrator, uses a variety of rhetorical tools, and I think he uses them very skillfully. But I also think that the authorial voice intrudes on and sometimes overpowers the unique personalities of these characters, preventing us from seeing them as unique characters. Now, that's less true in the Summer Tree, and it may have been his plan all along to turn up the mythic volume as the series progresses to show exactly that, to show the archetypal overpowering the individuals. Again, that would have been more compelling to me, I think, if there were vivid individuals to start with. So again, I think that structurally and intellectually, this is a very interesting and thought-provoking series. There's no question about that. But in the moment-to-moment reading of the story, the unfolding of the story, the presence of the characters, it left a little bit to be desired for me. But I'm probably wrong. So that's how I feel.
It's a great. Thank you, Evan. Actually, you said a bunch of things that make a lot of sense in there. And I would like to also echo what you said about the kind of difficulty of what he set out to do. And I said from the beginning, even to write a portal fantasy geared toward adults would be a difficult thing to do and pull off with those two very distinct, the modern voice and the mythical voice. And when they come together, usually that's fairly jarring. There's a dissonance in that. And so to make that work, even that would be difficult. But what I think you're right about is that for me anyway, the way I experience each of these books, if we were to think of the level of writing of, let's say, the mythical, the legendary, and maybe the mortal or something like that. If we could call it Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit or something like that. You know what I mean? Just the different levels of writing. And I feel like from the first book to the third, each book gets a little more toward the mythical as each of
Yes.
the characters, as you correctly said, the Toronto Five, which become, as we jested, or I did last time, the Toronto Four. We're kind of down to the Toronto Three here.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry. Sorry. Anyway, I feel like they do become more and more the archetype that they're supposed to fulfill. And it's interesting because this does segue into one of the major themes here, which is fate versus free will. And the more you become the archetype, the pattern, an archetype is a pattern after all, a universal pattern in storytelling, the less room you have to move, the less you could say free will you have. And there is this factor of randomness introduced through various means that Guy Gavriel Kay, I think, very skillfully inserts into this story that I think was going to be a major focus of what we're talking about. But for me, it actually worked. gradual mythicization, as these characters become the archetypes. But then there's enough humanity still within there for them to struggle with, where's my free will in this? Where is my choice in this? How do I deal with the fact that I am to be this role, which entails doing things that I'm not really 100% on board doing? And in the face of that, is it possible for me to preserve my humanity and make choices that deviate from the pattern, that defy the weave of the tapestry, or maybe change slightly the weave of the tapestry? So there's this wonderful tension between what is written or what is woven and the randomness, what we're able to do as free agents to influence things. So
Can
yeah,
I jump in on
yeah, please
that
do.
actually, Philip? Do you mind for a second
Not at
before we
all.
leave that behind?
Not at
Because
all.
I, for the most part, completely agree with what you and Evan are sort of saying in terms of that.
Mhm.
But I was thinking a lot about, and this is staying non-spoiler, don't worry. But I
Yeah.
was thinking that I don't agree with that in terms of Jennifer, because
Uh-huh.
I think she is the archetype throughout. And that's why there was complaints about it in the early book, because you don't see yet what she is. But I do think she is sort of the archetype throughout. And for me, at least, I know when I read this when I was younger and earlier, it did sort of frustrate me in various ways, her characterization. But watching your first two videos, and particularly what you were talking about, Evan, actually made me think about, it's not just about the archetype. I feel like she's Kay bringing the genre in. Like
Mm.
she sort of is almost standing in for that like medieval romance, early modern romance genre, in which case, like we it's not about depth. It's about very, very different things, right? Like that pre-novelistic discourse, right? And I feel
Yes,
like
yes,
he's
yes.
using that throughout intentionally, and that's not going to hit for a lot of modern readers, perhaps. But I
Mm.
find it really fascinating to think how he is trying to weave that genre into the fantasy in interesting ways, I think, through her character.
That's well said. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
I
agree.
have to agree. And if you don't mind, I think that's an excellent point. And I want to add with Jennifer that she is the anomaly amongst the group. And she is the anomaly because, to take Philip's example, I think I would feel, if in reading the series, that in book one, she almost went from Hobbit to Lord of the Rings in short order, and then starting book two, she's Silmarillion, because we're dealing with straight up Arthurian lore. So she was almost, if you want to, I mean, to simplify it, she was already in a box in a way, right? But it's what Kay did with the edges of that box and what he did to make her, as Erin was alluding, how she transcended that archetype. And I think for her character specifically, I think Kay meant, especially, and it wasn't just strictly about this aspect of the narrative, but with the essay scene, right? It was jarring, right? It was jarring. It was, for a lot of us, it was disturbing, etc. But I think that also was almost putting us on notice that this was going to be a bit of a different journey than the archetype, than the things we're used to seeing from that particular character and all of the different iterations we've had of Arthurian legend and the character she, really isn't evolved into. So I think that was an excellent point by Erin, that, but she's kind of like our marker for that there. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Can I just say too that I think that's such a brilliant thing that Dr. Keating said, about her being an
Sorry,
archetype from
please,
the start.
Erin. Evan, please call me Erin.
Okay, okay, sorry, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
He's Philip, but you're Dr. Keating. The about her being the archetype, because I think in some ways, uh, Jennifer is the character that bothered me the most and the least at the same time, because I'm on board for this, what you're describing as pre-novelistic type of storytelling. And there are, in fact, scenes in this book that I'd like to talk about that I think tap into that directly, that I think are some of the most beautiful parts of the entire series. And that's because the modern characters aren't involved. Like it's Kay dealing with already mythic characters, and so he can let his authorial voice fly in a way, and everything fits. But I do think that there's a promise made, like there's a promise made with the portal fantasy of it all. That I don't know that he keeps or manages. Maybe a better word is manages throughout the series. The first line of the Summer Tree is, I think, like something to the extent of in the periods of silence that came after, the question of why came up, why them, and that's still sort of a question I have at the end of the series. Why them from this from our world? And if it was just Guinevere, and not Jennifer as Guinevere, I think maybe it would have worked a little better for me. But but I think the point is very smart.
Yeah. I think also another of the Toronto Five who is an exception, but in a different way, would be Dave, in that I totally agree with what you were saying, Erin, about Jennifer's beginning more or less as the archetype, whereas the others gradually find that role and then grow into it. Dave is the one, his exceptional quality is that he's the only one who's really not very happy in our world and hasn't really found himself at all in our world, but he finds himself, and his journey into his archetype is one that is not as fraught with a kind of a double-edged nature, if you will. Whereas if you look at all the others, becoming the archetype means horrible decisions. It means facing parts of themselves that are difficult to face. It means becoming something sacrificial. It means loss and sorrow and sacrifice. But for Dave, it's more of a coming into his best self kind of thing, I think. So I think he's different a little bit too from the others in that sense.
Should we
But
move into spoilers as we
I
talk
think
about
it's
this?
time to move into spoilers.
Yeah.
So,
We're
you
dancing here. We're dancing.
I forgot to ask Evan if you had any slides this time. But
Well, I mean, I don't.
okay, okay.
Yeah, I don't. I don't this time. I had a toddler for a lot of time this week, so it was.
Toddler versus slides. The toddler is going to win every time.
Yeah, I love my toddler just a little more daughter, a little bit more than
Yeah,
slides, but
good, good.
just a little
Okay.
bit.
So in that case, this is everybody's warning that we are going to be getting into spoilers, and we're going to begin actually with a kind of a broader, but spoiler-filled discussion of this free will and fate business. And I'd like to set it up with a quote that really stood out to me as I was reading it, a passage here. This is a dialogue that's happening here with is it Flides? 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 I don't know how it's pronounced.
Odeus, yeah.
Flideus? Okay. Who shall know the design on the loom? Flideus said soberly. But this much I had from Kiernan of the beasts. The hunt was placed in the tapestry to be wild in the truest sense, to lay down an uncontrolled thread for the freedom of the children who came after. And so did the weaver lay a constraint upon himself, that not even he, shuttling at the loom of worlds, may preordain and shape exactly what is to be. We who came after, the Andain, who are the children of the gods, the Leos Alphar, the dwarves, and all the races of men, we have such choices as we have some freedom to shape our own destinies, because of that wild thread of Owen and the hunt slipping across the loom, warp and then weft, in turn and at times. They are there, Kiernan told me one night long ago, precisely to be wild, to cut across the weaver's measured will, to be random, and so enable us to be. So, and that word random is very important in there. Obviously, we're going to be talking about other threads I said that word on purpose, threads within the story that deal with this theme of free will. But I want to give you guys a chance to go ahead and share your thoughts on this, because I do think it is perhaps it is the main theme of the trilogy. So, anyone want to jump in on that and share your thoughts on the theme as a whole before we get into specific moments that I definitely want to focus on? Not all at once, please. All right, Evan.
Well, I was opening the floor to the rest, but I do
Oh,
think
okay.
that this is I do think this is the main theme of the book. Well, aside from the theme that I mentioned about, I mean, it dovetails with that theme, the theme of modern people entering a high fantasy world
Yeah.
and assuming archetypal roles. This idea of free will versus um, predestination or fate is a huge vector through which we can see the story. We learn in this book that it all comes down to the Weaver choosing to create the wild hunt so that there will be some kind of randomness or wild magic. I mean, it's a very interesting idea that the thing he creates to make free will is a very violent force. And there is this idea of a choice. A free choice is not something that comes free, maybe is a word that you would say. There is a kind of sacrifice that accompanies it. Even Dave's, you know, sacrifice. We talked about how they all have these negative experiences. Well, Dave's choice is to leave Fionavar at the very end. And
Yeah.
that's he's the one, like you said, he finds himself there. That's where he wants to be. But at the end of the book, he chooses to leave. And that is a sacrifice he has to make. But then we have all the other characters dealing with this, and we can talk about them all individually.
Yeah.
One thing that I really do want to talk about in terms of this theme is the scene where Darian confronts Jennifer in the middle of the book.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that because I think that's certainly a very important scene. The way that she reacts to him, and the way she conceives of him as needing not to be bound down by either her or her father, Rakoth. So you can look at you can. I mean, I'm gonna go there. You can pull any thread of this story, and the theme of free will versus fate is going to be central to it.
Absolutely. So, thoughts on what Evan just brought up, the scene between Guinevere slash Jennifer and her son as he comes looking for love, and she chooses not to bind him, not to force him to a side, to leave him uninfluenced in order to remain random. That was a bit heartbreaking, and even Kim calls her out on it and says, "Hey, why couldn't you just say you love him?" And for her,
Yeah.
she's like, "Well, I did because I didn't bind him, right?" So thoughts on that, either PL or Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I can start if that's okay with you. Because yeah, I think that's a great scene to point to in thinking about this, and I agree that this is something that's a tension throughout this entire series, intentionally because it's a tension throughout epic fantasy, right? Like the tension between prophecy and free will in any sort of fantasy is essential, an essential element. Um, and even more so since we're dealing with archetypes with Kay as well. But I think in that scene, it's at first I was very on Kim's side. I was like, why? Why did you do that? Like he's not even a year old. Like yes, he's of the ending. Like yes, he's powerful and whatnot, but he still is very much a child, sort of seeking love. Um, but I do think that it does. I do think that she is doing the right thing in that moment, and that's borne out in the sense that it's not just that she's shown her love by allowing him to be free, she also shows her love by sending Lancelot after him,
Yeah.
right? And in a weird way, though, I love that she does this because, in a weird way, that's part of the story, in a way, in the sense that she is sending Lancelot away. Yes, it's to do this thing. So it allows Kay to both have the archetype and not, because of course the child is completely new, but the sending away is exactly what we expect her to do when Lancelot comes back, right? So I love that those two things are actually like it's not that free will wins here. Actually in a really interesting like tension throughout, and the scene really captures that well.
Yeah, and I do, and I kind of like just quickly add to say that I think that there's a dimension to the scene that is not, I think is not sort of directly addressed by Kay, but it has to be in your mind, which is that uh, Darian is a product of sexual assault, of rape, right? And the emotions that she seems sort of self-possessed in the scene, like she knows exactly what she's doing. But you have to imagine that she has deeply conflicting feelings about motherhood and all these things that happen in order to bring her to this point. And so when Kim seems to see a very cold character, I kept thinking like, wow, I mean, she's got depths here that she's, I think, maybe scared to touch because it opens up a lot for her. And so I think that's certainly a dimension of the scene as well. And it does go into the free will thing because, you know, yes, we have the freedom to choose, but we don't always have the freedom to, like, the menu of choices are sometimes limited by the experience we have. And I think that's part of what she's going through here as well.
For sure. PL, any thoughts on this scene? And you're muted right now.
Yeah, that was an excellent point. Both Erin and Evan made, because in this scene, going back to that, let's not forget that Darren himself is the product of a situation where Jennifer had no choice. So his existence is due to him being forced on her, and she's chosen to resist. And as part of Darren's existence is an act of resistance by Jennifer. So when Jennifer just tells him basically he has to make his own choice and she's not going to get in the way, except to say that, again, going back to Evan's point, that his father wanted her dead so that Darren would never be born. So she's also implicitly saying to Darren that basically you were something who was not wanted. You were not wanted by, like, she's re-emphasizing that, and that seemingly you wouldn't normally have been wanted by me because you're a product of rape. But in the middle of all this, though, she still though believes that the only hope for the ultimate survival is to leave Darian free to make that choice, right? Despite all of her issues surrounding his very conception and everything else, she's still saying, you know what? But I have to look past that, and I have to trust him, despite the fact that essentially, I mean, he's shown himself to be a wild card, right? To be volatile, and we're not, but she still is unafraid, and is that mother, perhaps a mother instinct that this, like, as my son, despite how he was conceived, despite everything else, I'm going to trust him, and I'm going to not just trust him, but even if I can't ultimately trust him, I'm going to allow him the choice, because the free will is the most important aspect. And I made that decision to have him. That was my free will. So as an act of resistance, and now I'm turning over that choice to him. And I thought it was just, there were so many things about parenthood, I think, that for me, myself as a parent, now a grandparent, I was thinking about in that scene, because perhaps that's one of the hardest things that we do in our lives with our children, is trust them to make the right choices, to let them go, and just, without trying to unduly influence them and make decisions for them, or coach them or course them towards a certain decision, and to just be able to go, yeah, I have to let them make the choice. And with the fate of the world hanging in balance, potentially, I have to. So I absolutely loved that scene.
So we're going to talk at length about Darian, obviously, because I think he's the biggest example of the infusion of randomness. And that is an act that, as you said, PL, that Jennifer accomplishes in the story by choosing to have him and not bind him as well. Um, I also do want to, just while we're on it, though, and someone mentioned Lancelot and how she asks Lancelot to go after him. And Lancelot is straight out of the pages of legend here. I mean, he shows up into this story more or less, an archetype himself, right out of the Arthurian lore. And yet the story manages to humanize him too. It's interesting because our Toronto Five become more archetypal, whereas I found moments where the legendary characters became slightly humanized, one of them being Lancelot's response and doggedly following Darian and engaging in that incredible combat scene with Cordad, and the means by which he eventually, he has Darian essentially release his pain in a cry. And Darian does so, and that distracts Cordad long enough for him to chop off the arm with the hammer in it, and then use the hammer, although burning, scorching his own flesh in the process. I mean, it was quite something. We can talk about that, but I did want to just mention his response to Fladeus afterwards, when Fladeus makes a sort of offhand remark to him. It says, "It is in the weaver's hands." And Lancelot responds with this. He says, Lancelot said gravely, "Half a truth, little one. It is in our hands as well, however maimed they are. Our own choices matter, or I would not be here. She would not have asked me to follow the child. Fare kindly, Taliesin." So Lancelot, straight out of legend, has to act a certain way. He is bound to act certain ways within his character. And yet even he says, yeah, it is woven, it is fate, but it's only half true. We also have it in our own hands, he insists, even though he's just scorched his own. So any thoughts on that, in that scene or his role in here?
Yeah, I do want to just talk about Lancelot for just a brief second because that quote that you just read was beautiful, and I think it does speak to this sort of this what we've been getting to, this sort of three-dimensional uh, idea of free will versus fate. There is the fate. There's the fate of the Weaver, of a higher power, or maybe of an archetypal pattern, like we've been talking about, in which characters are fit into a predestined path. Then there's the kind of fate that the character is destiny. Like character, like we were saying about Jennifer's, like I was saying about Jennifer's menu of choices. There is a certain restriction and limitation to our choices because of who we are. And that is determined not just by our choices, but by all, as we know, all kinds of things. And then there's the sort of radical free choice, which plays a big role in this book. But I do want to say this about Lancelot because I just wanted it to be mentioned. The scene that is an homage to the Elaine of Astolat
Uh,
episode in Mallory
yeah.
is maybe my favorite in this book.
Hmm.
And it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is that this is where Kay's authorial voice can really sing. There's this sense of like, there's the two senses of simplicity, which is where simplicity can be like a distillation, or it can be kind of like it can be thinness and cliche. And I think there are times where he goes in both directions, but in this one, you have this beautiful distillation of like a romantic quest. It very much mirrors like some of the quest narratives in Mallory, and it's ethereal and melancholy, and then it ends with Lys, this one of the Leos Alfar who was not in the battle, with her, instead of what happens in Mallory, which is that the Lady of Astolat dies and goes down the river. She at the end of, she falls in love with him, and that, like, again, that's not a thing that happens in contemporary fiction. You don't just have these like people falling in love right away so completely to the point that they're willing to throw their life away if it doesn't work 5 minutes later. But here it works because of the way Kay weaves it. And then the ending is that she's the first one to hear the true song of the Leo Alfar, after the very tragic thing we talked about before, which is that the soulmonger was taking all these elves before they got to the Valinor of this world. And it's beautiful, and it like I said, it's melancholy and ethereal, and I think Kay really finds a groove there that, in a way, it's an episode that's separate from the main story, but I was like really loving it, and Lancelot is obviously a huge part of that.
It was brightly
Yeah.
woven, you could say. Yeah. Aaron, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
I wanted to jump in on that scene because I really wanted to talk about that scene because I loved it as well. I love like that. And there were a couple of things to add to like what Evan said, which was fabulous is also one of the things I loved in that scene, as well as the melancholy, was all those moments, and I'm not going to look for it, but so I'm paraphrasing here, where you have Lancelot being, he didn't tell her the many times this had happened before. He didn't reveal to her. Like he keeps that moment special for her, even though he has gone through it. And so like that, his care for her love is just, it's so beautiful, but also, and I'm so glad you pointed to that ending because I feel like this is a subtle foreshadowing because by changing the ending of this episode that we know in a very subtle way, I think it's sort of foreshadowing, it doesn't have to be the exact same. Like there's something different about this world that, if you're rereading it, you can sort of pick up as you're
Great
going
point.
along.
Yeah.
Great point.
So her death or her going away, in this case, it becomes a positive thing, a thing of light. And you're absolutely right, Erin. The ending, which we will talk about, an ending which is brought about by another character, but it does change that triangle, the Arthurian part of all of this, which is played over again and again and again. But one character's act of free will, you could say a very chaotic character, throws himself into that and changes that outcome. We'll definitely have to talk about that, but that's closer to the end. So any other thoughts though on our friend Lancelot, for now? Well, I'm sure he'll come up again later, but.
I
Peel?
also want to say, and you know me, I'm here to break your TBRs. You know what an Arthurian legend is one of my favorite mythos out there. Please check out Natania Barron's Queen of Nun series. Excellent, exceptionally well written Arthurian legend. Uh, she's also does what she does with examining medieval fashion and how it impacts literature is absolutely brilliant. She's another scholar. She's another scholar. You guys would really appreciate, I think, her Arthurian interpretations. In any case, in her first book, entitled Queen of Nun, the titular character is her version of Anna, Arthur's sister, and that I'm not gonna. It's not a big spoiler in that in this book, Merlin prophesizes that Anna is someone who will be forgotten, and her name will be forgotten from history, and no one will remember her. And so much of the book is Anna's struggle to try and change that narrative and make a difference and be someone who is impactful in the overall course of history. And when I think about Lancelot, I go this goes back to Evan's point, and I think between Philip and Evan, you broke down these categories of fate, free will, etc. And I'm not saying Kay is trying to say this specifically, but I would argue that it is Kay. What Kay is saying is that it is the randomness that's the main factor. It is the randomness. It is that ability for the characters to ultimately change their fate, and in the face of the higher power, in the face of their own specific past. I think he's essentially saying it's the randomness that's the big element. What the character actually chooses to do when the choices are before them, that will throw all of that into chaos potentially and upend the apple cart of fate. And I do hope we get to talk about that one character very soon because that is the one scene in the book that
PL is just
All
I was
right,
bawling.
fine. Let's just talk about Diarmid then.
I was bawling. I was bawling.
Let's talk about Diarmid. I
Yeah.
think that's where I probably wept the most as well. Was his sacrifice, which does very knowingly, and then from the beginning, I always felt like he was a kind of a Henry V type character out of Shakespeare's play Henry V, and he even had his own Falstaff in Tegid. And I was so happy to read in the afterword here that I was right about that. That the guy Gavriel K said something along those lines that he was a kind of a version, if you will, of that. But he does bring about this possibility that we can break the pattern. We can change it. You can't alter it completely because somebody has to die in that moment. Somebody has to die in fighting the super Urgak character whose name slips my mind at the moment, but I'll figure it out. Someone had to play that role, and it's even Camlin was the name of the field, and Arthur is ready to go. He says, "All right, this is it. I know I never see the end. And I know this is what I'm supposed to do. And then just randomly, he just, Diarmuid just bellows out and starts charging while they're bickering about who is it, Lancelot or Arthur who's going to do it. And then he just charges right in. And knowing that he's probably not going to survive this, but being sacrifice being a major thing we talked about before, but changing the pattern. He can't alter it altogether, but he can slightly change it, and that changes the fate of Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot. So thoughts on that, on Diarmuid's beautiful moment.
PL, go,
Oh
please.
yeah,
Oh,
we have to
Pia,
let PL go
watch
first.
away.
I'm sorry, but we talked about Tolkien and the influence of Tolkien on Guy Gavriel Kay. You know, for those of you, I'm sure we've all read them. We've all read, especially the similar. Read the Lord of the Rings. Fingon versus the Lord of the Balrog. Fingolfin versus, the ultimate Dark Lord himself. Yeah. Ewan and Mary versus the King of the Nazgul. Like, you name your, against the odds battle where the person essentially has no chance of winning, but in some cases they do, and in most cases they do alter the course of history to just that degree enough, even if they die, that either their sacrifice inspires resistance or it actually affects the outcome of the world, etc. But if you have read those passages, and I think back to, again, those specific passages in Tolkien, Fingon versus Lord of the Balrogs, Fingolfin against Morgoth, or Ewan and Mary versus Nazgul, all these battles against a hopelessly powerful foe, and how these people perform and what they do. It is just, first of all, I just have to say again, it is so beautifully written. The way it is written and the way he, how it's the buildup of how, what an amazing horseman he is, right? That's commented the way he rides. And obviously, he's a fantastic swordsman. And it's the beauty of the battle, the way it's described, and even the fact that, when he takes that mortal blow, he makes sure he doesn't get totally severed in half, but he adjusts himself just enough so he knows he's going to take a mortal blow, but he's going to be able to get close enough to strike that blow in return. I mean, and then of course, his brother putting him out of his misery in the end, right? Out of kindness and love, and that, like, again, I was sobbing. I was sobbing. That scene is just, if you want to see the brilliance of Kay, that scene, that's for me, that's the dot, right? You can put that dot there to say
a lot of the power, the poignancy of that scene too, for me, was because of Shara's presence there.
Yeah.
And what we're not going to have is the fruition of that love. That's just tragic. So there's a continuous message here is the nature of magic requires sacrifice. Altering the threads of the tapestry requires sacrifice. So it's never just a pure, joyous victory. There's always sorrow in the mix, right? There's always sacrifice.
but
And
also specific,
Uathok is the name of the guy, the big Urgok. Uathok, yeah.
but also specific sacrifice to
Yes.
save another person specifically, to know, hopefully saying, I'm going to save Arthur, this hero, so that he can in turn save potentially the world and make that difference. So to knowingly, it's not this ethereal sacrifice where you're not sure this may change the fate, no, you're doing because you believe in the fact that it will, right? And I think that the specificity of that sacrifice really, really, again, Evan, man, I was thinking, when I reread that scene a few times, like, if Evan doesn't cry, this one, his heart is made of stone.
I never felt so much pressure reading a book than having PL in my brain, in my mind at every major turn. But I will say that even though I didn't weep, I was affected by the scene, and I think the reason for that goes back to what I've been saying, which is that if we're talking about characters that have a characterization that is maybe somewhat more similar to what we expect in contemporary fiction,
Yeah.
Diamond is your guy. I mean, he's drawn from Henry V, and that's true as well. But in some senses, Shakespeare is who's originating this contemporary characterization, and so he's an easier character to invest in. And when he does make that sacrifice,
Mm.
it's the one character who jumps into the fray there where you're like, no. And one disappointment for me of the series is that we didn't get more Diamond, because Kay's got a lot of stuff to do. And like Erin said earlier, the books are pretty short. The last one's a little longer, but the book, I mean, in terms of like the full length of the series, it's pretty short with a lot on its mind. And so Diamond gets, I think, too few scenes. I would have loved to see more of him, and even worse, Shara gets way too few scenes,
Mm.
because I think I saw in an interview that Kay said that he had no real plan for Shara, but she was one of those characters where when she appeared on the page, she made her presence known and said, I need to be in this more, and that's what resulted in the knife scene from the summer tree, which is one of the best scenes of that book. And yes, Diamond is an unsavory character, can be an unsavory character, but he's a compelling character.
Mm.
In the first book, he can be a little unsavory, especially with what he's doing to Shara. And Shara, there's something there too, but I wanted more from both of them. But if you're going to throw someone in there for a sacrifice at the end, you want to get me, going emotionally. I mean, he was the only choice, him or Tegid. But Tegid was just completely, he was completely left on the cutting room floor.
Erin?
I mean, I guess. I don't know. I always sort of like, it makes me a little sad whenever I hear someone describe Diarmid as unsavory, because I know he's a cad. He's a charming cad, and
Yes,
I have
yes.
a weakness for that character type. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to have much to do with them in real life, perhaps, but like in fiction and in fantasy, I just love that character type. And I do think, and this I think the book plays this out, like he's met his match with Shara. I mean, yes, he seduces her through lies and these elaborate plans, but then she tries to assassinate him. I'm like, okay, good. Like she is strong. She is in no way like a weak seduced maid, right? So I feel like they're well balanced in that respect. But I think to go back to like that death scene, which breaks my heart every time because he is my favorite character in this book. He always has been. I love him and I agree. I wish I had more of him in this. Um, but the thing that really kills me is the way that we have a number of different POVs, like Paul's, and then but then we get his, and when we get his, it's still so very him, right? Like he's still like there's an irony there. There's like the humor there as he tries to sort of keep that humor as he's marveling like how is this thing so fast? This isn't right, and how is and so like his voice keeps the moment from being like maudlin. Like that's actually why I think no matter how often I know it's coming, it still makes me tear up because he manages to like lighten the intense pain of it by having it to be his POV, right? Like I just love that so much.
Can I just say I too have a literary weakness for cads, and so that I share that with you. And your point is so good. It's so good because the thing that's brilliant about the scene is the way Kay focalizes it through other characters before we get his vocalization, and the way you described his. So a lot of the book is told in close third person, but there's always this battle between the authorial voice and that third person characterization, and the free and direct style. And I don't know that it's always successful, but with Diarmid, or when I say it's not always successful, it's that the authorial voice I think is a little too strong. But like I said before, there's reasons for that. There's things he has to do to create this atmosphere. But with Diarmid, he does have a close third person where you feel that Diarmid's almost he wants to wrench the story away and tell it himself. And that's what you kind of really want from a close third person. And so that's why he's so engaging in to me. And it's such a tragedy to see him go.
And
Yeah.
I love cats too. Absolutely love cats. I love
We're
writing.
all for cads here.
I love reading them. But I think one thing you hit the nail on the head, Evan. One thing about that kind of character is that um, you can't look away from Diarmid when he enters the page, and he doesn't want you to. He wants you, although it's this dichotomy where he knows he's not the focus. He knows he's the right hand to his brother, the High King. He never really aspired for High Kingship. He always wanted to be the dashing warlord and the one wooing the women and the brilliant swordsman and the captain of arms, but he never really wanted the ultimate leadership. He was quite content and quite happy to support and facilitate his brother's rise, and that's what he always wanted. And his ending, I think that is the kind of ending, other than his happiness, which are that he, if he couldn't have that, that's the ending he would have drawn for himself, going out in a blaze of glory in battle, sacrificing himself for a greater. I think that's precisely the ending that he would have crafted for himself, other than, again, growing old with, and that was also what got me about this, that, because I think so much of what is wrapped up in, you talk about Henry V, a warlord culture and a warlord um, ethos is so much about the fact is about sacrifice, and it's about that, hey, part of this is risky business, man. You lead men to battle, or warriors. You're gonna do this at the head. You're gonna be the first one into the fray. Good chance you're gonna die, right? But let it be glorious, right? Let it be glorious. Let it be meaningful. Let it be glorious. And so knowing that that is what he's going to be, memorialized right after this, right? Because of his sacrifice, that's what he would have wanted, right? Because so that and
He would
that
have
just
wanted us to talk about him way before the end of this.
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, and that's what we've done.
Yeah.
Preferably with a mug of ale, probably. But yeah, he's just wonderful. I love his character, and as much as he's a bit of a force of chaos in here, an injection of randomness there in the moment. Totally the opposite of his brother Aileron, who is very planned, very strategic, very methodical. And I love that element that they kind of are this dichotomy that runs throughout the whole thing too. But another character, in the interest of time, I want to get to is Kim, and another one who does defy the pattern, and eventually we see her resisting in a very different way. Of course, she's no Diarmid. She dutifully plays her role as the seer, and it's a kind of a give and take between her and the Balrath, which is sort of which one is leading, which one is, and she understands that there's an interplay between her own will and this thing that is telling her what to do, this ring that she has to keep following, and summoning people to roles that she knows are going to cause terrible pain to those people, and doing things. And we see it when she summons or changes the very nature of Ruana and the other Paraiko, the giants, changing the very way in which they have interacted with the world there. And I think if it hadn't been for the how deeply she felt that violation, she probably wouldn't have eventually said no. When she got to the ice dragon of the dwarves, she just says that's where she draws her line and says, no, I'm not doing this to this creature. I'm not compelling it. And she says, no, now things play out differently because of that. And because she doesn't make the dragon come, it leads, you could say, to the death of Imraith, the Nymphace or whatever, I can't remember, the unicorn, Pegasus unicorn creature that Tabor rides, and almost Tabor's death too. So there are consequences to her defying the pattern, but she is able to change it, slightly by in that moment of defiance when she says, "No, I'm not going to." And she even later says to Matt when he's questioning her about it, "We have a choice, Matt. We are not slaves, even to our gifts. I chose to use the ring another way, by transporting them into where the army of the dwarves was about to be on the side of Rakoth Malgrim, and instead." They're able to take the dwarves and bring them over onto the side of the light. So, thoughts on Kim on that moment? Anyone want to jump in for that? Go ahead, Erin.
Well, one of the things I loved about that, in the sense that I do like that it really showed the consequences of making that choice, right? Like, and it's not just the Tabor versus Dragon thing, which is certainly a large consequence of that, but it's also the ring never works for her again.
Yeah.
Like by actually rejecting it in that moment when she's at the lake and it's like the crystal dragon and whatnot, like by rejecting it, she has just given up that power. And there's a sense that she sort of knows that that's going to happen. And so, like at the end, she actually gives it to, I think it's the priestesses, but basically to have and keep, um, because there's no point, her keeping it. So I do, that's one of the things I love about this because it's not just glorifying free will, it's showing the very, very real material sort of effects of pushing against like prophecy or power in that way that I thought was really interesting. The other thing I love about Kim that I want to throw in at the end too, though, is that the fact that she goes home and the idea that there's perhaps need for a seer in our world just makes me incredibly happy,
Mm.
right? Because that sense of like maybe our world needs a bit more magic. Like this, her sort of going home to me gives me one of the reasons, and I know it's a very thin portal fantasy if we're thinking about portal fantasy, but it gives me one of the reasons for why it's important it's a portal fantasy, in the sense that it is important that at the end it's like maybe our world needs magic. Like maybe that is something that is also sort of will become really important for us too. So I love that she goes home with that in mind, right? After having given up and like playing the part in this first world, what perhaps can I do in my own world? And I thought that was really great.
Yeah, and she goes home, of course, with Dave, and there's a thought there at the end that maybe they'll. I mean, certainly they'll be friends. Who knows? But he's asking her out on a date, it seems. But I like that they're not lonely at the end. That
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
made me feel good. Like, okay, at least there's someone they can talk to about all of this, And I'd imagine that they would have that at least. But yeah, I think we're getting a kind of a romantic slash comedic ending and comedic in the classical sense here with the various couples. Although there is tragedy, like I said, Shara doesn't have a happy ending essentially, except in that everyone has a happy ending, but there are losses within that, I suppose. But thoughts on Kim, guys? Either.
I think Erin's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's absolutely intentional on Kay's part that the part of the message of this book is that our world can be reinvigorated with a return, not necessarily a return to, but a greater appreciation for what we lost in the mythic patterns of our distant past.
Hmm.
And so this idea of Kim going back, I didn't think of it that way, but that's absolutely a way of him signaling that because the portal fantasy thing is the way I sometimes conceive of it is like the world of Fionavar is like the Lord of the Rings, and the five from Toronto are like the readers of the Lord of the Rings. I mean, that's sort of what I think he's trying to say with having it be a portal fantasy and bringing real people into it. Is like, yeah, they're engaging with these ancient patterns, and it's showing how it can invigorate their lives and maybe even invigorate their world, which could potentially be, maybe Rakoth being ascendant in the series is a way of saying that we are lost in some way down the line of the chain of worlds.
Hmm.
Going back to Kim, I do think that one of the more affecting things in The Darkest Road was her changing the nature of the Paraiko, and it's quite sad. Uh, Again, I think with a little more of the Paraiko, maybe a little more of Kin, I might have felt it more. But there's a very sweet Grace Note moment where Imwraith comes with Tabor at near the end of that scene, and the unicorn kind of nudges his head against Kim, and it's so beautiful, and to see how later how her decisions essentially implicate and mean, like Erin was saying, there's a cost. It means the sacrifice of this beautiful creature. It made me rethink about that moment because the canyor that the Paraiko say is what heals the unicorn, and the blood is removed from its horn
Yeah.
in a beautiful moment of cleansing. That's what they were before Kim had to change them. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of dynamics there that I think are really interesting. And yeah, I like that early scene with Kim.
PL.
Yeah, quickly, I think my message, and those are all excellent points by all of you, by the way. My message was definitely on in line with our world needs leaders that through experience, a combination of experience and emotional intelligence and compassion can make better choices that will make our world better. And Kim's experiences from and we're talking about all the way from when Kim when she was dealing with Darian, she when she was going to give him the circlet of Lyson, right? So she was gonna, put it on, and the light goes out, and Darian thinks, oh my God, this means I'm evil, and then he takes off and takes the dagger, and you think, okay, is he gonna kill himself because that was the dagger that Yasan used to kill herself, whatever, all the things that Kim has experienced, right? And all the choices that she's had to make specifically throughout this installment in particular show us that, again, she has emotional intelligence. She's got the experience with these very difficult, very extremely difficult choices. And the choices she makes are sometimes out of the box. However, they're, whether it's a crystal dragon, she makes these choices and they are the right choices. And yeah, I think she was sent back to our world to be the kind of person with power, because it's not enough that you're someone who has emotional intelligence, made the right choices, and has experience. You have to have some kind of power and influence to be able to affect the changes, and clearly she does. So I think that was a message. That's why she got sent back to make our world better. Kim for prime minister. So
Okay, yeah, for sure. She'd make a good one. Another character among the Toronto Five that is not really uh, present physically, but is present emotionally and spiritually throughout this book is Kevin, obviously, and he made his big sacrifice in book two. But I'll tell you one of the second most emotional moment for me was at the end when Dave tells Kynwyn the name of their child is going to be Kevin. And that says a lot about Dave's journey as a person too. That he didn't like Kevin a whole lot. There was a friction there because Kevin was everything Dave couldn't be. Because Dave had this thing going on with his father liking his older brother better because the older brother was more successful and intelligent and educated, and Dave felt inadequate, and so part of that resentment rubbed off onto Kevin. Kevin was kind of like his older brother in a way. He was successful where Dave was not, but that fact that he was embracing that friendship at the end and understood who Kevin was then, and says, yeah, that was a no-brainer. Like he immediately said, Kevin, that's the name of the kid. That was a beautiful moment too, I thought. So Kevin was present. Any thoughts on what I just talked about there with Dave or Kevin? Then I want to talk about Paul, and then we got to get into some of the big stuff with Darian. But let's talk about Kevin and Dave first before we talk about Paul. Anyone on Kevin and or Dave?
Go for it.
No one's jumping in. Okay.
I don't have
I
much.
mean,
I
I
don't have much on.
guess,
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Aaron.
no, I was just going to say it's sort of the same thing, I think, which we're about to say, which I don't have a whole lot on
Yeah.
either of them.
Yeah.
And although the one thing I did want to say in terms of Dave, because you mentioned it, I do find it interesting that the one character who's not as much of an archetype of the Toronto Five,
Mhm.
like who is a bit more, like has this completely different character arc from the other four. The reason, like you mentioned, Evan, you used the word choice in terms of him going home, but he doesn't have a choice. He has to. He
Yeah.
he chooses like Kynwyn. I never know how to pronounce. I'm a soft C person, so I always like Sinwyn, and I know that's wrong. But um,
I mean, he
she
had a choice. He'll just
she
die.
kills him or he goes
Yeah.
home,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's but I do find it interesting that it's the character, like it's almost a reversal of the others, right? It's the
Yeah.
character at the end who has been all about sort of his choices, his development, his growth in a very sort of more modern novel way, right? That you expect this sort of character growth, who is like, no, his end is constrained by sort of those circumstances in an interesting way. And he doesn't seem too disappointed. I mean, he seems quite happy actually to go home, and he wants to repair his relationship with his father, which I think is really nice and sort of hopeful, but I did find that interesting the way he's the one that doesn't really have the choice in going home.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's short flashback or short vignette where they do actually go into some of his relationship with his dad, and his brother and all that. That was I did enjoy that.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I'd argue that Dave is the one character of the Toronto five, four, three that he had the, I don't want to say
No,
the most.
Jennifer is with us. Okay,
He's
she's with
off in
us.
on
Yeah, yeah.
Avalon or
What are you trying to
something.
say?
That's like heaven, you know. She's gone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, she's gone. But he in some ways had the most, I don't want to say successful arc. I mean, he didn't die for one. Number two, he experienced loss and tragedy, obviously, with his friends, but he also became the type of warrior that he would have wanted to be. He had glory. He found relationships. He felt like if you want to look at the person who probably came out on the better end of the scale, I'd argue that Dave is that person,
Yeah.
and then he goes back. And I think overall, when you talk about, does a writer give his characters the arcs that the reader wants or the arcs that they should have? And I think Kay gave us the arc for Dave that he should have. I think he was the one out of all of them that I was hoping that he would actually not stay there and would go back, because I think for him he developed so much while he wasn't there, that with everything that he learned, that he was going to be able to take that back and be successful, as opposed to some of the other. I mean, Jennifer was never meant to be really in Toronto in the first place, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, some of these other characters had arcs that you would argue, well, okay, it was fitting for them, right? Like them staying, them dying, but I think Dave was one person that, yeah, like I think he benefited in some ways the most out of the entire experience, and I think he had the arc that in some ways I think he was the most successful in a way out
He
of
had a
all.
nice holiday to Fionavar. He became a horse warrior. He
Yeah,
slept with a goddess, and
Yeah.
then he
yeah.
went home and
And
struck up a
instead of being
friendship
paid
with.
child support, man, he's like, he's like a deadbeat dad too. On top of that, but
And he defeated the Dark Lord. I mean, he
yeah,
helped.
He
yeah,
helped.
he's got some. He came back with some
Not
serious.
a bad couple weeks.
Learn how to
Yeah,
use
yeah.
it.
I mean, I think I'm joking about the deadbeat dad. Right? I mean, I'm sure obviously he's mournful that he doesn't get to raise his child, because I think that would be devastating, right? That he doesn't get to see it, raise it, etc.
But
But
he's half a god anyway, so he'll be all right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess. And the gods don't make the best parents, so
Yeah.
but yeah, like I just think that his arc specifically was one that was ultimately good for him and satisfying. So
Okay.
that's all.
Fair enough. Paul, I think, is an interesting one because of a couple of relationships that Paul has. I loved what Guy Gavriel Kay did with Paul and Gallatin and the forgiveness.
Yes.
That element of this was just gorgeous, I
I'm
thought.
glad you brought that up.
The forgiveness element with Gallatin, and that's another love triangle, by the way. It's not just Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere. It's Gallatin and Leeson and Amergen, the wizard guy, the mage. Um, and then the other relationship, which initially I was like, really? Okay. Was the jail with Paul at the end. Because we have a lot of pairing up at the end going on, which is part of the romantic kind of comedic, sort of tradition, I suppose. Initially I was like, but then I was like, okay, well, good for them, I guess.
No, that totally had. If you read Tagana, that had Allison and the woman he ends up with.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
point in that story where you go, oh, okay, I guess they're going to be together now. I mean, there was no setup for that at all, but
Well,
they're
so in
both
this
good
case,
people.
I feel like there was some setup that I missed
Yeah.
because there was this tension between them. And he even has us at jail say, "Oh, well, this was the moment, at the beach when I saw you summoning Liranan. That's when I realized I was actually in love with you. That this butting heads. I mean, she is, after all, the priestess of Dana, and he is, after all, he's got Mornir in him. So it's the mother and the father and all that. So how much of that is what's bringing them together here in the end? I don't know.
And
But anyway,
she did love Eilel, didn't she?
did
Am I
she
wrong about
have
that?
romantic
Or
aspirations there?
That was his
someone had
aim,
No, no,
wasn't
no.
it?
That was Isan.
Isan.
Yes,
Hassan,
Yes,
that was
yeah.
Isan.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Because I was like, I confused there for a
That was
second.
Hassan. So anyway,
Yeah.
thoughts on the Galaden relationship with Paul, and then maybe on the jail, whichever you want to jump into. But I love the one. The other kind of puzzled me for a moment. Oh well, okay, you know. But How did you guys take those two things?
I mean, I do sort of hate the overwhelming heteronormativity at the end,
Uh-huh.
even with like the suggestion of Kim and Dave. And there is like another book, right? Like Isabel harkens back to some of these characters. I don't know if you guys know that. And so
Oh,
there is an element of that, but
I didn't know that.
it's also, though, I also recognize it's the romance comedic structure, right? So it also is sort of expected from this sort of thing. And I agree with you, Philip, in the sense that when I first sort of read The Paul in Jail, I was like, really? But then like when you reread and you're thinking about it, they are very, very similar. And
Hmm.
of course, they are by the time we get there, that's also they are the archetypes, right? So it's bringing a sort of unity that, in a way, and especially because of how Jael becomes no longer the high priestess, like this is very much it's Dana's will, and it is incredibly important for saving the entire world, right? That Lila grabs the axe and pulls Finn away from the wild hunt. I don't know
Great
if we're going to be
moment.
talking about that at any point, but
Yeah.
like this is incredibly important moment, but that is what is necessary to clear the way for her then uniting. So it does feel like a very, microcosm, macrocosm, like the different levels, the cosmological unity that is sort of being implied here happens again through like the humans. So I'm okay with it on that level, I think.
Okay.
Because of that, I don't know if I fully buy the like actual romance, but it makes sense structurally.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
On the
agree.
heteronormativity point, what's going on that boat with the Arthurian characters? That we
It's a
don't know about.
throuple? Are you saying it's a throuple?
I'll tell you one thing. Reading Mallory at PL's insistence, there is so much homoeroticism
Yeah,
between
Yes.
yeah,
Lancelot and
yeah,
Arthur. It just
yes.
jumps out at you.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm letting myself believe that there's all kinds of creative things happening on
Another
that
plug
boat.
for the Tiny Barian series. It's very queer normative. You have, everybody getting on with everybody, eh, but one thing I'll say about overarching bouquet in general. And for those of you like Erin who've read, probably everything that he's written, I find that it's funny when it comes to Kay's romance, he's really good at writing, giving you the romances that both you expected to come to fruition and the ones you didn't. And when you get to Syria, when you get to the Syriantid mosaic with sailing to Sorrento. Look, you'll see what I mean when you get to that duology, especially you'll see what I mean. He gives you those relationships that I didn't see this coming, but you know what? That kind of makes sense. And the ones that are more predictable. He's very but he predictable that they would get together, but how it happens is unpredictable. That's all I'll say. Without giving away too many spoilers, Erin might know what I'm talking about. Like he's very good with structurally with those two kinds of romances, right? So,
See,
but
Philip,
it's
PL's doing this already for the rest of the rest of our whole journey. He can't resist. He knows he's not going
Great.
to be here for the.
I'll
I
be
love it.
watching though. I'll be watching, but I'll see
Love
if
it.
the thing seeds of planted if that's in your head and you see that coming. So
Can
Yeah.
I pick up on the Gallatin thing because
Yes, please. Yeah.
that really is one of the most poignant moments, the forgiveness of Gallatin by Paul at the end. And when I said earlier that some of the things I enjoyed the most in this book were the treatment of the already mythic characters. The backstory that we get of Galadin earlier on in the book, where we learn the story of the love triangle with him and American and Lysanne, and then his vow essentially to destroy the world, which is essentially like what's so cool about it is that it's separate from Rakauth. Like he's just a kind of he's a vehicle for him, and almost he's almost a more compelling big bad than Malgrim is, and he's got more dimensions in that way. I think the mythic sweep of that and those heightened emotions and that archaic diction and construction that really worked for me in that section. And then once we get to the end with the forgiveness, I thought, yeah, that was a very beautiful, poignant moment. And Galladan is one of my favorite characters in the series.
It's so interesting that Paul had been thinking all along, third time, this is gonna be a confrontation. I'm gonna have to be the one who takes care of this guy. And he does kind of by forgiving him in a very unexpected way. And I feel like that's another random element that's been thrown in there, perhaps, that Paul is able to take that role. Either of you, PL or Aaron, have thoughts on the Galladan part of all of this?
But Paul sees it. It's specifically because Galden can hear the horn that Paul says, you know
Yeah.
what, this guy, he's not all bad. He's not all bad, right? He can't be, right? And I think it's one of those features in a book when the classical bad person or villain does something good. You're like, maybe they're not exactly who and what I thought they were. I think that was what Kay was depicting here. But of course, again, Paul had the emotional intelligence to see that. He had the ability to see that. You have to be able to see it for what it is, right? He didn't have to, right? It wasn't
Even Galladan
something.
didn't realize it
Yeah,
until
even
Paul
Gal didn't
pointed it
know it.
out.
It wasn't something obvious that Gal didn't run into the ocean and save a baby. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't obvious. So but that I love, but so I love this subtlety, right? That's a sign of a great writer. I love the subtlety that you have to make this connection as to why Paul is choosing, to spare Galvin, right? So I did love
Well, and I feel like it's the distinction, like Galadan versus Rakoth Mogrim, like you was talking about, like sort of big bads. It's evil versus chaos, right?
Mhm.
Because evil is just evil, but chaos, as we've seen, like that's the basis for all free will. So, and like the fact that like
Great point.
what Galadan wants is just pure destruction, which is why he calls in the Wild Hunt. He's far more on the line of chaos than he is on evil, right? And I think
excellent point.
that, yeah, that highlights that separation, and Paul recognizes it, right? And brings him, interestingly, to the father. I mean, I don't want to go too far into that, but I'm sure there's a deep dive into thinking about the fact that Galadan goes back to his father for healing. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, you brought up Rakath Malgrim, and I think that's a great segue as well, because the last thing I want to talk about, and then of course you guys can bring up anything you want, is Darian's role in this and his relationship with it is the darkest road, and that is Darian's road. That is his path that the book is named after. And a lot of this has to do, I got it right. I didn't say
But he does have a darkest hour as well. You
he does
can
have a darkest hour.
so we
Maybe I'm
could
just trying
write
to
to
retitle
Guy
this.
Gavriel K and ask him to change it maybe.
So maybe I want him to write a sequel called The Darkest Hour. I don't know. But
Well, this is
anyway,
gonna be your title, your next
that's
book,
my
though.
next book, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm interested in the nature, even before we get into Darian and his journey and what he ultimately does with that sacrifice of essentially using you knew that all the tools were going to come into play, right? The circlet of Leeson, the dagger what was it called? Lokal or
it's
something?
Lockdoll.
Lockdoll,
Lockdoll.
Lockdoll, that's it. And that he kills himself by first blinding his father and then essentially impaling himself as his father's holding the dagger, which calls up the curse, which is essentially if you kill with love in your heart, you can give your soul to this person, but if you kill with no love in your heart, you're gonna die. And so that was a very poetic, very mythical moment there. I thought that was just gorgeous. But Rakoff Malgrim is someone who comes from outside the tapestry, isn't he? He is something that is, um, his very nature is something that I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about, because he is evil, pure evil. He's just there to be evil, bad, horrible. He is the big. He is a Sauron or Morgoth type character that is outside the tapestry. Is clearly a threat to the tapestry. Wants to dominate whatever is there. So I want to hear your thoughts on him, and then we can get into gradually the this Darian's journey and his role at the end, which brings about the eucatastrophe of this story, you could say. So, any thoughts on what were you guys thinking about Rakath Malgrim and his very nature, and what Guy Gavriel Kay was the message behind this character? Because I feel like there's something to do with his ideas or this theme here of free will and fate and all of that. That Rockoff Malgrim is part of all this. But thoughts on that, anyone? Want to dive into that?
Well, I can start if no one minds.
Please do.
Because I guess one of the things that I was thinking about regarding this is that this does feel like, and it came up when I was doing the first book with my class, like it does feel like it is a very binaristic fantasy on its surface.
Mm,
But actually, the way that he describes how Mogrim came into the universe, because the idea is like, I think it's important that he was never part of the Weaver's plan, right? Like, we often have this sense, and if you think of Christian mythology, it's like Satan, evil was almost part of God's plan. It was a whole, like, this sort of binaristic system to test humankind or whatever, wherever you subscribe to that. But the idea that this is not part of the Weaver's plan, but that evil was something that was a byproduct of giving people human, like free choice, right? And so came from outside the loom, came from outside it. And so, and I thought, interestingly, could only be anchored into it, which I thought was so good,
yeah.
by the birth of a child, right? Like by reproducing and that actually anchoring him in, I thought was brilliant. But the bigger sort of point I thought that I think is really important is that the sense that evil is not necessary for good. It's
Yeah.
actually,
Excellent. Really well said, because there is a point in the story, if I recall correctly, where it says, because the wild hunt exists, that gives us not only
Yeah.
our free will, but it also means the possibility of the existence of something like Rakath Malgrim. And because of the wild hunt, something like him can come from outside and threaten everything.
But the Wild Hunt was created by the Weaver,
Correct.
but Rakouth, it seems, was not created by him.
No. But somehow,
Yeah.
because of the existence of the wild hunt, that makes also possible the existence of Rakath Malgrim, if I understand that right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 And because it all goes back to my boy Dearman. um what I love is that Kay gives us examples, yes, with the dragon as well, but I'm just going to read, and this is again, the passages that just did it to me. When Dearman is mourning, wounded and dying, and Shara reached for all the courage that she had and granted it to him, saying, for herself and for DR, and this is, of course, to Aileron, his brother, let it be done with love,
Mm,
right? So Aileron is going to kill his brother with love in his heart because he's doing it to spare him pain,
mm,
right? And so Kay's when he's giving us a direct example of how this is done, when the unicorn, she throws off Tabor,
yeah.
right, in midair, hoping that Tabor is going to survive, and then
All right, we just had a quick chaotic element enter into the discussion there with the cats. But back to you, PL. Can you please finish making your point?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
of course, cats are the nature of chaos, right? So,
Yeah.
but yes, so and I was talking about the unicorn when she slew the dragon, throwing off Tabor, doing it with love, to avoid Tabor from dying. So, again, with the passage I read about Dearman's death, Kay gives this example of what it means to kill with love. What some examples of what it means. So, because I don't think that when the author gives you these analogies, I think it's far more effective. And sometimes when they're direct, it really impacts you even harder. So,
Yeah, well said. I actually also, Evan will appreciate this. I think um, when that when Tabor fell off of Imrith, or I can't remember the unicorn's name, but you know what I mean. And they try to the mage tries to break his fall, and ultimately he is caught by Arthur there. That was a Tigana moment as well. That I won't say specifically, but you know what I'm talking about, Evan, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a moment that gets recycled, gets used beautifully in Tigana, and I loved it here too because you have so many tragedies. You have Finn, and he ultimately goes. You have Darian, who we're going to circle back to in a moment. He goes, but this young man, Tabor, doesn't. So I like that we break that pattern there, and that he even gets a purpose at the end of it and becoming the next mage. And
yeah, I love
yeah,
that.
I like that a lot. Uh, anyway, but back to Darian or whatever you guys were wanting to get to talk about.
It's very illuminating to hear Aaron and PL talk because I think something that Aaron said before about Jael and Paul getting together is that structurally it makes sense, even if maybe it's a little bit bewildering. The parallels that PL brought up with Ileran and Diarmin and what it means to kill with love versus
Mm.
what it means to kill without love, which is what Darian forces Rakouth to do to him. Um, that's an example of like I said at the very beginning, structurally there's a lot here, and in terms of the kind of story that Kay is trying to tell, which is a very rare thing because this evoking of myth and epic, it's in a wholesale work is really not something that many fantasy authors try to do. They pull in elements and use them in a more modern setting, and obviously in the much more modern day, they have been reacting against the patterns that were set up by Tolkien and the sources he was drawing from. But there is a lot of power in Fionavar, and I'm learning more of it hearing Aaron and PL and Philip in simply setting up these patterns and comparisons and resonances and echoes. I mean, there is something there, even if that other level is not present, and in those old stories, that other level is not present. And so it's a speaking to his ambition and the success of that ambition, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what he's pulled off here is really something. Yeah.
I also want to quickly say about it was an article I read when I was reading about K, and I think it's about color. It's about color symbolism, and
Uh-huh.
I'll quickly reference that, because in the book, we have Darian flying in the form of a white owl, and I was like, okay, just quickly, some of the meanings of the white owl, symbolically, purity and innocence, messenger of wisdom, harbinger of change, symbol of death and rebirth, keeper of secrets, bridge to the spirit world, clarity in decision making, symbol of solitude, symbol of hope. Those are just some of the attributes ascribed in this article to a white owl. So, and I think they very much apply to Darian.
Hmm. Lovely. Yeah, I mean, that journey is fraught. There are these moments. He is allowed to continue to exercise his free will because of Lancelot's sacrifices, and also ends up being that Lacey of the if that's how you pronounce her name, of the Leos Alfar has to sacrifice as well because of abiding by Lancelot's wish that she free Darian when he's in Daneloth. He's frozen there. He doesn't even realize that it had happened to him even. But she ends up falling in love with Lancelot as a consequence of that interaction. So there's just a lot of that happens along the way, that a sacrifice that enables him to ultimately get there. But it is himself, he himself, who makes that decision in that moment. That crucial, that is the absolute climax of the book, is the interaction between him and his father. That's where all this has been leading. That's the end of the darkest road. And what do you guys think of that climactic moment, and how? And I always knew that the dagger of Lockdown was going to be involved. I always knew the circlet of Lysan was going to be involved. It's one of those more, I feel, mythical, archetypal things that feel inevitable, but in the hands of a great author, still can be so compelling when the moment happens. That's how I felt about it. And But I want to hear your thoughts on the moment when Darian succeeds in defeating his father, who thought to use him. And in that very moment when Rakath Malgrim thought he had won everything, Darian succeeded in making that sacrifice. So your thoughts on his role, or any of these moments along the way?
Well, I
I
think,
guess one, oh, sorry,
sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Piel.
No,
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 please
please
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Okay. It's a very small point because I know we've talked a lot about stuff, but the one thing I really loved about that scene, and because I agree completely with you, Philip, in terms of knowing sort of it was set up so well to know sort of how it was going to play out in various ways. So it's very satisfying in that way when you get there, at least for me. But one of the things I like, which goes back to our randomness and free will conversation, is the emphasis on the end that like as he dies, his eyes are blue.
Hmm.
And there's that this has been gone throughout, right? Where like the red comes from Rakoth, and of course Jennifer's eyes are green, and the blue is just Darian's, uniquely Darian's, right? So it is very much the emphasis on his individual choice, not like basically Jen was right. Like that moment is him unconstrained by anyone, and the choice he makes is for the light. And so I loved that. And I also loved, people might think it's a bit too much, but I did love when Finn dies, that narrator sort of telling us that Darian waits, and like as he moves into the afterlife, he's Derry again. He's small and he's got his big brother, and that was just really
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. Because he always really was still a child, the whole a very
Yes.
innocent
Yeah.
child in many ways.
Accelerated, age
Who,
accelerated
who
due to
was
his madness.
told, yeah, and he was told all along, no, you're evil by nature. I mean, Kiernan says, why didn't you just kill him, in the first place? And this is, I feel like, the strongest message in the book, that no, we are not defined by a nature that we have to conform to, that there is a choice there. And ultimately, Darian does make that choice. So I thought that was beautifully done. And the most powerful of all the examples of that element of choice or randomness, if you will. It's put so many different ways in here, and I thought that was another aspect that I loved. That was for me the most powerful and central. Really, was Darian's moment there at the end. So
And also the ultimate evil, it got me thinking, and a lot of it too is because of, I guess, my twisted nature and my career and things that are going on in the world. Just that, the ultimate evil, if you go to any prison, even the most hardened criminals, are their moral compass is set by abuse against the weak and disadvantaged, against children. So the most hardened criminal will want to assault or kill another criminal that's incarcerated for harming a child. It's the worst thing that you can do, right? And you have an entity that you know um you know created a child out of sexual assault, disowned or disavowed, or didn't want that child because he was worried it would bring about his potentially his downfall, was willing to kill and sacrifice that child. And that is the worst of the worst evils, right? But yet it is this child's, in a way, innocence that saves the day. It's their innocence and their purity,
yeah,
right? Despite the fact that, as you so aptly point out, that everybody said, well, the child's got to be evil. Look who his father is. But yet, um, the child, um, the child's narrative, it flies in the face of that of
yeah.
that
Beautifully
that
said, Peel.
ridiculous. So,
And there was the love shown by Vay and by Finn and by Jennifer. There were moments in his life where he was able to witness love and experience love. And of course, without that,
yeah.
it would have been hopeless, I think. And I love that relationship with Finn. That was beautiful. And I totally agree with Erin, the ending where they're kind of reunited there and it's Derry again, that was beautiful. Final thoughts, guys. Any final thoughts? Because we've been, I know it's late, especially for Evan, and
Oh
we've
yeah.
been going for nearly 2 hours. So finally, let's wrap. I know we did not get a chance to talk about everything. It's a big book. So many wonderful things in here we could also still talk about, but we are at the end here of of the darkest road. So final thoughts from you guys. Who wants to go first?
I'll just start by saying that I so loved having this discussion because although I still do have issues with the series, and I think there are there are things here. There are, I think, craft. Kay is clearly learning his craft in this series, and reading Tigana, you can see the places where he is improving, where he is learning new ways of doing things. I mean, uh, he never returns, or at least I don't know, but my sense is that he's moving towards this historical fiction with a fantasy, the quarter turn to the fantastic thing that he does, and released from the mythic pressures of this book. Like I said, very few authors have tried to do something like this on this side of Tolkien, and when you release that pressure in Tigana, and now Tigana is still a secondary world, but it is much closer to historical fiction because you have this Peninsula of the Palm, which is an analog for Renaissance Italy, and the city states and all that, and that frees him up to do it frees him up to do a lot more with character, and it loosens the archetypes and the patterns and all these things, and so you get really morally conflicted characters like Dianora, who I think is a more complex character than anyone in this series.
It's true.
And then you have him improving in his ability to create tension and his ability to create a sense of danger. And there are so many things that I love seeing from this to that where he's going. And I'm so excited to see where he goes beyond this as he moves into actual history. And so, yes, I do have issues with the series. I think there were some promises made that were not kept in terms of what he's promising with the narrative. I would have liked to see more from the Toronto Five in terms of individuality and more of that interaction and interplay between the modern and the mythic. But I also really got a lot from this conversation, and from people who have read the series multiple times, like Erin and PL, who knows so much. It's a great achievement. It's a great achievement, and I had a great time.
Fantastic. All right. How about you, PL? Any final thoughts that first of all, thank you, PL, for joining Evan and me for this discussion series. You added so much richness to everything. It's been so great to have you through this journey. So thank you for.
You got me to read all the Arthurian canon.
I mean, look what you did to Evan. Look what you did to Evan.
You have a mark on my life forever.
Listen, the honor is mine to learn so much from all of you, to be joined by luminaries such as Erin at the end here. I've learned so much from all of you. Thank you for having me. I'm extremely honored. What I will say is this: it is simply a plea. As an author myself, as someone who's a bit older, gray beard, I would say this. So I think Erin's the only one that's probably read almost everything that Kay's written. I haven't quite read everything yet, but I'm getting there. But I know that for me, Guy Gavriel Kay is one of the greatest authors, fantasy authors of his generation. But that's not because of any one book. That is because of the body of his work. But when I look at the body of his work, for me, I'm not looking at one particular book versus another. I'm looking at those moments of brilliance in all of his books, whether or not a single book itself was the best that's ever written, or the best that I'm looking at the pinpoints that when the stars shine and they come out in all these various books. Some books it's a cluster of stars. Some books it might be a few stars. Some books it's a whole constellation. But I think when you finish your journey, Evan and Philip, and you look back, I think you'll be looking back to especially Evan for you, to some of the stars or the clusters in this book, and you'll still be admiring them as much as the constellations and the Taganas and the all the seas of the world and the sailing to Sorrento, etc. I think you're going to remember the individual stars and the moments of brilliance in this series that are really going to make your journey through his work worthwhile. So while this may not stack up as your favorite of his books, I think there's going to be a lot that you're going to remember and cherish. So, and I just wish you all the best in your journey.
What an appropriately poetic way to put it, PL. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
great metaphor.
Yeah, love it. And Erin, thank you so much. I'm so delighted that you were able to join us for this discussion. You added so much to everything. So, yeah, fantastic. And I hope we can persuade you to return for a future discussion, maybe. So, but thank you so much. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, this has been, as I said, I've been watching the first two, and I only got halfway through the Tagana so far, but
Mm.
being a busy academic, it gets a little difficult.
We
But
do
I
talk a
love
lot.
Tagana as well. And I haven't read all of them. I haven't read the most recent
Uh,
K. But other than that, I have read all of them because he's a sort of a comfort read for me, I guess is actually the place where he's at. And part just because, yeah, it's you sort of know what to expect, even though it's always surprising new details and whatnot. There is and you will get this. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys get this. There's very much a K voice
Yeah.
it sort of goes through all the books. But I'm gonna be very me and actually go very small in my final thought, which is one of the things I really loved that we didn't get to talk about and just makes me so happy, is that when Jennifer and Lancelot and Arthur get to sail off into their whatever, their afterlife, the dog gets to come too.
oh, Caval.
Arthur gets to bring Cavall, right? And like Cavall, like he saved Paul on the Summer Tree. Like he's been in all these battles too, right? Like he is also sort of a quiet hero in all this, and I just really loved that he got to have his retirement as well with his person. That made me really happy.
I'm so glad you brought up Caval there.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah. That is definitely a highlight. I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you, all three of you. We are going to be Evan and I are going to be forging ahead. Like I said in the beginning, we're going to be doing a song for our bone. We have a couple lovely guests who will be joining us. Josh from Red Fury Books and Joanna from Joanna Reads. And I'm so excited for that. And the journey will continue every month.
Philip, we're just leaving base camp. We have a
I know.
long way to go.
I know. We are looking up
And I'm excited.
the peak up above us. Where base camp is behind us. Here we go. Here we go, my friend. But thank you all so much. And if you're out there still watching, thank you for listening. But that is it for us for now. Until next time.